Hi, everyone, and welcome to our podcast, Unpacking Organizations, where we discuss our passion topics. Shradha, how are you doing?
I'm doing very well, Rupert. Hello. And I'm having a fangirl moment right now because how often do you see Amy and Rupert in the same frame? So it is amazing. It's my honor to have both of you here. And of course, Rupert, you're always here. But Amy, welcome to our podcast, Unpacking Organization.
Unpacking Organizations, the Practitioners Podcast. Sponsored by Orgvue.
And Amy needs no introduction. Everybody who knows about org design, I feel that should know about Amy. And Amy is a founder. She started Kate's Kessler organization, and which eventually got acquired by Accenture. And Amy, welcome, but I don't want to dive deeper into your bio. I would like you to introduce yourself and tell us more about who you are. How did you get passionate about org design topic? And what are you doing these days after kind of like I'm making air quotes here, retirement from Accenture?
Shradha, Rupert, a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much for having me on the podcast. Uh, Love to talk about org design. So very briefly about myself, because I'd love to get into talk more about the discipline and the practice. But it's a 30-year journey, and as most careers, unexpected in some ways. My passion has always been complex systems. I started my career as a city planner. Live here, joining you from the middle of Manhattan, which growing up was my dream to live because it still fascinates me. How do cities work? And so, what I've been very lucky as part of my work is to travel a lot and to visit many great cities. And I often say that when I had the opportunity to get into organization development and then design, it wasn't really intentional. But I think what attracted me when I realized there was a field around that is that it was helping leaders do the same kind of thing, look at complex systems and how all the layers work together. So I often say, I love architecture and I think human beings are fascinating, but it's really the city and the organization that is where my passion is. So my work over the last 30 years has been taking Jay Galbraith's brilliant thinking from the 70s and 80s and turning it into a set of methodologies and tools and frameworks, and working particularly with my wonderful partner, Greg Kessler, over the last 15 years to really build a methodology to do this, to demystify what is organization design and make it practical and accessible to business leaders and to HR leaders.
Very cool. What an amazing parallel between city planning and organizational design. That's amazing. We always talk about that, think about org design as building over cities because you're not letting go of the old architecture. You're honoring the old architecture and building on new. So you actually have done it in your life. So,
Yeah. Yeah, so we were very lucky. Greg and I had a wonderful little boutique practice where we worked with great clients and had time to write and help build the field. And in 2019, we were invited to work with Julie Sweet, who was the new CEO of Accenture, as she thought through her own operating model. And that project led to her acquiring us in 2020. So the last 4 years, I've spent building an internal practice at Accenture. We came as 10 people when I retired just in March. We left 150 wonderful practitioners, great leadership. The first time ever there's been a scaled global org design practice in any firm that really uses the same methodology. And it's been so exciting to see. And that was the challenge for me, is how do you accelerate the development of a craft? How do you help people, great consultants, learn the tools and methodology much faster than I did in my career?
Amazing. And Amy, if you reflect back on where we are with org design as a practice, and you've dedicated a large portion of your life to building this practice, and let's say you'd have to give yourself a scorecard. Not you personally, but us as a practice area. What would
right.
you score us in terms of how effective org designers as a practice right now, in not the consulting world, but the inside organizations and the execution of org design?
I actually feel really positive, Rupert,
Do
and
you?
much more than a few years ago. I
Okay.
think there has been a cumulative kind of building and understanding that you have strategy, you have talent, and then you need organization, and that those are the levers a leader has to build an organization. The war on talent and so much about leadership, was really the theme of the last 20 years. And I think maybe even the sort of acceleration of new technologies has helped to bring a focus on organization, even as people say, oh, we don't need organizations. Well, we heard that back in the 90s, and we need them more than ever. And then what is the role of and the complexity of helping people work together? And we can talk more about some of those trends we're seeing. But the reality is that organization design is a very new profession and discipline. It didn't really exist. I was at the Organization Design Forum conference just last week and reflecting that 15, 20 years ago at a conference like that, people were still arguing over the definition of org design. That's done. And it was a wonderful, robust conference where people were going deep into methods, thinking, talking about systems theory and how culture connects, but in a very sophisticated way. And so one data point when I see that what the conversation is. The second data point is at Accenture and across our colleagues, we're just seeing much more uptake by leaders earlier on in an organization's maturity. So the fact that there are org designers that are working with PE firms and their portfolio companies that are still in growth mode and just starting to diversify their business portfolios, or even sort of startups that are at a Series C kind of stage, beyond the big mature, kind of organizations that we've always worked with that know, oh, we have to change, we have to look at costs, we've gotten slow. We're seeing leaders say, we need to think ahead. Org design is part of our growth strategy. And I think that's very exciting. So we're at a good place. And I think this is relatively recent.
I think that's very optimistic, Amy, because sometimes Rupert and I talk about that org design still does not have a permanent seat in HR tables in many of the organization. And what does that mean? Even though the CEOs are asking for it, the leaders, the business leaders are asking for it, but is HR delivering that?
Yeah, no. And that's a really fair question. And here's what I think is tough. So org design is not something you do every day in a company. And it's just like every sport, it's a practice sport, right? So I would say I can be good at it because that's all I do 24/7. I only take projects that are org design projects. I'm not pulled into talent issues or change issues or, recruiting or any kind of other things. I get to say no to that and only do org design. So I get to practice. And that's what's so important. And look, I've trained thousands of great HR leaders, internal org development, change and talent professionals, and they love this work. They see the need, they're asked, but they might do a project and it might be a year later that they do another project, and you just can't build the skills and the library of experience. So that I think is what's tough. And we were very intentional and conscious about this at Accenture to say, if we're going to build an org design practice, we need to have our arms around the consultants who do this. If we don't have a project, they sit on the bench. We don't want them going off doing something else, so that we can get them enough reps in. So you have the practice, you have the reflection, you're working with colleagues who are also doing it. They're coaching you. You have other people to teach. You have a time to say, what have I learned? That's really, really tough for the 99% of internal HR folks who are supposed to have it as part of their toolkit. But if you're doing it once in a while, are never going to get the depth around that. So it's a craft, it's really a craft that needs apprenticeship and practice. So I'm not sure either what the answer to that is.
Mm-hmm.
Fair. That's a fair point. I always say
It's a
that
fair challenge.
it's an exposure challenge, and it's a less demand, less supply kind of a challenge, right? Because
Yeah.
there's less demand to do this work. Like frequency is less. It's not like recruitment, it's not like compensation or talent
Right.
management, where you're doing it as a cyclical process, as a programmatic process. And therefore, the exposure gets less and then the confidence gets less. And so we just continue to deploy consulting firms to do the work that HR should be
But
doing. But yeah.
I guess my challenge back a tiny bit on this is you have the macro op model design where, Amy, where you spend a lot of your time, and that's like heart surgery, and you do that a lot
Yeah.
as frequently as any organization. But actually, the detailed micro design, the role design, that's happening continuously, and that's very much linked to workforce planning as well. That kind of, and so I think there's a time for independence and there's a time for challenge that, frankly, you need someone external to help you with that, because you just need that perspective
Right.
and to frankly help through the politics of of the process as well. But then there's the detail and the right sizing and the detail design, the micro design, where my position is that should really be owned internally. And I guess what's your perspective on that?
No, I totally agree with you, Rupert. It makes me think of two different things. So you're absolutely right. Sometimes on the big shifts, honestly, the role of the external consultant is to have that, to be able to say the hard things, to bring that dispassionate external lens. It's not even about expertise, but just the role of being external is important. But ongoing, I think what needs to happen is, and Shradha, I think you got at it, is how do we make this more of an ongoing thought process as opposed to an event? We have a restructuring event, a redesign event, a reorganization event, as opposed to, in the same way we do talent reviews, let's do organization reviews. And we're continually adjusting. I mean, Jay Galbraith always said, take those 3 words out of your vocabulary and think about what are you organizing toward, instead of looking backwards to what are we fixing and reorganizing and restructuring and redesigning. And first of all, it's just much more forward looking. You're building. People like to do that rather than fix something. But then it has to become part of almost an HR and a business leader kind of, okay, we're doing our annual operating reviews, quarterly reviews, and talent reviews, and we look at an organization review. And then with that, I think the opportunity, if you've got that pull, is really to have tools that help people who don't have to be experts. So Orgvue, which we all know, and tools like that, I think there's a huge opportunity to bring those in, because then it isn't so dependent on an individual's expertise, experience, insight, judgment. You can actually start to use technology and tools to create insights. Then, our HR and business leaders can look at together and say, well, we don't need a consultant to do this. This is part of our work. And I think that's also a very exciting part of our discipline that, just has been scratched, is how do we use basic tools, AI tools, technology tools in our work to do better diagnostics, to model possibilities, to get insights, to raise questions, even then to augment, the work of the HR and OD professional.
That's very true.
Yeah. Heated
Would you
agreement.
like to agree? And would you like to also help us and our listeners about the importance of STAR model in your practice as you're talking about the practice?
Yeah, it's interesting. Jay, a story often told is, if you look at academic kind of writing back in the 1950s, 60s, when people started to think about, you could have sort of complex organizations, and there was a lot of wrestling about what is the right organizational form. Should it be the divisional, which we think of a sort of a business unit product, or should it be functional, this, that. And Jay's big breakthrough and his insight was, well, there is no best way to organize. It depends, and it was based on contingency theory. If your strategy is this, we are going to diversify our portfolio, we're going to move into new markets, we're going to be more innovative, or if it is, we are actually going to narrow our focus, divest, really become more operationally efficient, or any other sort of choice, then you create an organization to deliver on that. And so the STAR model is our mental model of organization design that really represents the system. That how do we shape human behavior in groups at scale, right? We know a lot about individual human behavior, which is somewhat predictable, but quite, individual. When you start to look at human behavior in scale, it's amazingly predictable across time and across national cultures. That if you organize people, because we are so team oriented, we want to know, what's my group, what's my identity, what's my team. As soon as you draw a circle around a group, you create a boundary. And the whole work of organization design is to understand, where am I creating boundaries, which is structure and roles and power? Where do I need to knit across horizontally, let's think, through process, through our decision-making process, management and workflows? And I would say a lot of technology then is working there. How do we need to align motivation, which is metrics and rewards on the STAR model, at the individual, team, and organization, so that, it makes it rational. People are rational. I really do believe that most everybody wakes up in the morning and says, I want to do the right thing. I want to move the ball forward. I want to collaborate. I want to feel good at the end of the day. How do we create a system that, makes that true? And then, of course, our talent practices, our people practices. That then creates a system that can be designed and be dynamic, and we can be working towards something that builds the right capabilities toward our strategy. And that's the STAR model. And, you'll hear people as they try to look for new things and say, it's old, anything that's 40, 50 years old can't be true anymore. The world has changed. And I often say, certainly the business context has changed. Certainly technology has sped up decision-making and increased the capacity of what we can do. But as human beings, the three of us have not evolved. We are human beings, evolved very slowly. Much of our hardwiring, how we act, was put in place tens of thousands of years ago. And the work of designers is to recognize that, celebrate it, harness that energy. And I think our work is twofold in org design, is to make companies better, organizations better, to deliver on their mission, whatever that is, but to make a great place for people to work. We spend a lot of time at work. Why shouldn't it be a place that, feels good? And I walk into too many organizations that don't feel good, unnecessary. Right.
Forward. Cost cutting.
Sure. Yeah. And a lot of that fixing, I mean, we see it going on in tech right now, right? It's not actually a something structural that is happening in many places. It's just overhiring, because there wasn't thinking about, we have a problem, we throw people at it. And when times are good, we don't need org design because we just hire more people. But that is a failure of leadership, to not design to a roadmap, a system, having those organization reviews, saying how do we adjust so that we are not having to do these reductions in force and restructuring and downsizing, which is, not only to the people who are let go, but the people who remain. Just it not only is destructive, but it creates a cynicism, in our society that we see when I'm sure you've had conversations around how people feel about work and engagement and connection and trust, loyalty, belief in the companies that they work for. Uh, because if you don't feel that your leaders are thinking about this now, you may be caught later on. So that probably, I love your provocation, and I hadn't thought about it. But if I was going to say what, you know, leaving aside my optimism from the beginning, if I was going to say what is needed, it is then building this in as something that we do before we need it. And it's almost a moral imperative to do so that we don't
Right.
destroy our companies. Yeah.
You're right.
Mm. Yeah. 1970s, the 1970s. Oh, I think 77 was his first book, designing. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
That
And
is
again,
so true.
that's why I feel a little bit optimistic when I see companies earlier on starting to think about this. One of my colleagues, Darko Lovric, is a great thinker, just put together a piece I was reading yesterday where he's talking about minimal viable structure. And
Mm,
right, so it's just as you're thinking about the product, think about, okay, you know, even the startup, as you get to, a few hundred people and you start to get to your next product or into a new market or segment, you need to think, instead of saying, oh, we're so nimble, we're so fast, we're so agile, we don't want to be like those big companies. No, how do you start to think now about what is the right touch of creating clarity, accountability, reducing overlaps, all
yeah.
of that we know helps bring out the best in people. It's not a binary like we have teams and we have bureaucracy. No, actually, structure and thinking about vertically and horizontally is a very powerful way to unleash organizational energy.
I would like to repeat that minimum viable structure. I like
Yeah,
that so much. Just as
not my thought.
MVPs. Yeah.
Yep. Yes.
Right.
Right. Yeah. Well, it's hard to be specific. It's diagnostics, then I would say, right? And a diagnostic can be 10 good questions. Don't skip it. Just just go in, because whether you're looking at what is and there's different kinds of diagnostics. Hey, we're going to grow, so we're doing great now, but what's the gap? What are the capabilities we don't have, right? What questions do we need to ask to know what we need to build for the future? Or we thought we have a great strategy, great people, but something's not working. We're too expensive, or we're too slow. So then, hey, go and ask people close to the ground, close to the customer, what gets in the way of doing their work, and understand that. And you just cannot do this work well without starting with a set of questions to say, how do we understand really the dynamics of the system? Thinking about what is universally true. As I said, there are patterns that we can see, we know, and sort those out. We were designed to get this result, which we have. Now we're trying to do something differently. Of course, our design's getting in the way. That's a universal pattern. Versus context business specific patterns that have to do with maybe because we are still founder led, or our early culture, or how we have worked together, or beliefs that we hold that now are perhaps getting in the way. And those diagnostics and bringing that sort of truth of the organization forward is the most important tool. People think it's actually about org models and interaction models and decision rights and all of that. That stuff is easy if you've done a good diagnostic.
That's a great one. I guess there's a trap. I think you've answered both questions in one, because the trap is not doing a good diagnostic. Unless there's another trap you want to throw on the table.
The trap is absolutely a sense of urgency that is unfounded. My husband is a physician, and he often says that it takes as long to cure a chronic disease as it took to create the chronic disease. And so people think, so even a surgery or pills, right? It's changing the behaviors or the underlying, whatever the problem is, takes time. So this idea of coming in, when we come in as consultants or internal folks, and all of a sudden leader says, it's urgent and we don't have time, so we don't need a diagnostic, or I know what the problem is, or we need to make this change. And that sense of this problem has been building for months or years, and that we pay now or we pay later. So taking a little bit of time around the diagnostics, participative, iterative design, modeling possibilities, understanding the implications of different choices, creating leadership alignment, which is not one meeting, but a series of interactions and understanding, absolutely pays off in accelerated implementation. I'm a big believer, once you start this work, you go at pace. You go as fast as you can, but you cannot rush this work.
And cut corners
and
is
then the
what.
activation. Yep. Yeah.
You cut corners at your peril.
At your peril. And also understanding that the design, may be this much, but the activation may take this long. Which is really what organization development is. Practicing new behaviors, new ways of working, new interactions, building those new muscles and capabilities in the organization. We can only do that as fast as we make decisions, as we have cycles of decision making. And so that may take 6, 12, 18, 24 months to really get good at how we do innovation, how we make crisp decisions or priorities or around our portfolio. So the design we could do pretty quickly, but bringing it to life, let's be realistic about that. That urgency is often misplaced.
I love that, Amy.
Brilliant.
That's a phenomenal way to end. Thank you so much for your time and for your for what you've given this field. You really. A colleague of mine, Giles, met Jay, and in the early years when we were starting off, and I was going to meet him, and I didn't, and I really, I'm sorry that I didn't have the opportunity to meet him, but I think that you have done a phenomenal job at taking forward, his legacy and then building on that, and I think Shradha and I and the people that are deep into this practice area are really grateful to you. So thank you, and I think hopefully people found this useful because I certainly did.
Thank
Likewise,
you.
Amy. Thank you so much for being a part of this. We appreciate you. Take care.
Pleasure.
Bye, everybody. Bye now.
Unpacking Organizations, the Practitioners Podcast. Sponsored by Orgvue.